Amara Enyia joins us. She is running for mayor of Chicago, and she is one of, I believe, 18 candidates looking to replace Rahm Emanuel. Amara, welcome to the Young Turks Network.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
All right, it's great to have you. You have brought people together. You brought people as diverse as Chance the Rapper and Kanye West together. So I don't know how you quite got them to agree. So what do they see in you that has brought Progressive and Kanye together?
Well, it's really interesting. So both of those conversations happened sort of out of the blue, and they were completely separate. In the case of Chance, he had actually reached out of the blue and said that he had been following my work for quite some time, that he rocks with me, he wants to talk about the vision for Chicago. And so that's how we connected. And we had found ourselves in some of the same organizing spaces over the last few years. As you probably know, Chance has been very active in education, in equity, in the mental health sector in Chicago. And so we never had met formally, but we found ourselves in some of the same organizing spaces. And so he reached out sort of out of the blue, and that's how we connected. With Kanye, it was similar, out of the blue phone call. He has been talking about coming back to Chicago and really wanting to give back to the city. And so he told me that my name kept coming up when he was trying to figure out who's doing what in the city, who's really getting work done, who is really changing the city. My name kept coming up. And so he actually called me out of the blue and said he has these big ideas about how he can give back to Chicago. And he thought that he wanted to talk more about the vision and the platform. So that's how that happened. Two completely separate occurrences, but very interesting.
Very interesting indeed. It's good to see Kanye on the right side for a change. So now you don't take corporate PAC money. So that's very important. And I want to get back to a crazy story about what happened to you last time you ran and what happened this time instead. But let's save that fascinating, I was going to call it fun, but it's not really fun. But it is a fascinating story till a little bit, because you mentioned the stuff that you've been doing in Chicago that caught their attention. And that's really interesting. So, look, you've had a lot of different roles, and you're executive director of a neighborhood chamber of commerce on Chicago's West Side now, but a bunch of it caught my attention too. So you do something called Thanks for Paying Your Taxes. What is that?
Yes. Yeah. So I fundamentally believe that people need to know how their tax dollars are being used. And in the city of Chicago, where so much is done behind closed doors and there's a lack of transparency, I think one of the most important things that we can do to empower people is to actually show them how their tax dollars are being used. And so Thanks for Paying Your Taxes was a series that I came up with that helps people to understand in the budget how their money is being allocated. There's a lot of mystery that surrounds that, and sometimes the numbers can kind of mystify the fact that your public dollars are going to certain things and you should know what your dollars are going toward. So I created the series to be an easy way to convey this information to anyone. Anyone should be able to understand how the city uses their tax dollars. And this series was just a kind of a more fun way of breaking down the budget in a way that people can understand and be empowered with that information.
No, I love that. I think that's exactly what we should do in a democracy. Tell people what we're doing with their money. Speaking of which, you also co-authored a book called Chicago Isn't Broke, Funding the City We Deserve. Fascinating. So there's a popular misconception that like we're always running out of money. America's running out of money. Chicago's running out of money. So what's the reality?
Well, the reality is that you always hear that scarcity rhetoric. In Chicago, typically when it comes to requests to invest in the neighborhoods and to invest in human capital across the board. But we've seen so many instances where our public tax dollars have been used for other projects where the scarcity narrative never becomes an issue. So what the book does is it brought together a number of authors, those of us who've been doing this work for quite some time, and we identified three main things. We identified where our money is currently being wasted. That includes what will be essentially $1.7 billion that we'll be paying in police misconduct cases. We see that as money wasted because of a refusal to implement the necessary reforms is actually costing us that amount of money. So it's money wasted, it's money that's hidden from us. And for that, we look into what's called tax increment financing, which is your public dollars that are used and they're supposed to go toward catalyzing development in blighted communities. But all too often, we see those tax increment financing or TIF dollars going to fund big box retailers or large developments that would otherwise already have those resources. So that's money that's hidden from us. And then we talk about revenue, where we can actually generate significant revenue for the city. And for that, I talk about a public bank for the city of Chicago and how transformative that could be for our economy, how we actually shore up our population so that we have more property tax revenue from a larger population. As you're probably aware, Chicago's been losing population for the last several years. So we broke it up into those three categories because we want to push back against the narrative that the city is broke, because the only people that get that narrative tend to be in the neighborhoods where there's been a lot of disinvestment. But when we look at those who are benefiting, they never get the scarcity narrative.
Well, now I know why the big banks are not donating to you.
Yes.
If you're out advocating for a public bank where the public would keep the interest and actually serve the community, I'm not going to play well among the big bank donors. So, but you talked about there, if we don't have as much police abuse, we won't waste as much taxpayer money in Chicago. But you also say restorative justice can be violence prevention. What do you mean by that?
Yes, so restorative justice practice is a way of actually diverting people away from the criminal justice system and using different mechanisms besides just policing. So often when we talk about violence, we talk about policing. Violence, in my view, is actually a symptom of our public policy failings across the board. It's the lack of economic investment. It's the lack of investment in our schools. It's the lack of investment in mental health resources that are necessary. And we see so much investment in police infrastructure. What restorative justice does is it creates tools for conflict resolution. It creates internal community mechanisms for resolving issues. And it's also a diversionary tactic so that people aren't being pipelined into the criminal justice system. And I advocate for actually expanding that in our schools, in our communities. The other thing that the city can do is actually invest in block club infrastructure. So we have cut funding for block clubs over the years. It used to be called community policing. That budget has been cut. I firmly believe that instead of relying solely on police, we can actually fund infrastructure where neighbors are empowered to monitor their own blocks and have some of the infrastructure necessary to keep a watch on what's happening in their own communities. That's another thing that the city can do that doesn't rely just on policing to address violence issues.
So I want to give the website here in case people want to help. AmaraEnyia.com, and you can also donate and volunteer through the links, and we'll have those in the description box below on YouTube and Facebook. But I also wanted, you mentioned violence, and I wanted to get to that crazy story about what happened last time you ran. So why were you not on the ballot last time?
So last time we ran, that was my first time running for office. It was a lot of hard lessons learned. What happened is a couple of things. So one is that a week before we were submitting our petitions, our campaign office was broken into, was completely destroyed. We had tens of thousands of dollars of damage, walls busted out, windows broken, and the petitions that we had on hand were torn up and strewn about the office. So we took a really big hit, and it was actually about a week before petitions were due. Then when we regathered ourselves and went to submit our petitions, that following week, we were actually challenged. So a couple of other candidates actually got together and they challenged our petitions. Well, by that time, we had fewer than we anticipated because of the burglary and because of what happened with the break-in. And then we also, because we were a grassroots campaign, really just doing the hard work, we didn't have the resources to complete the entire challenge process, which is designed essentially to drain your time and your money, and that's what essentially happened. So it was a pretty brutal experience, and we learned some really hard lessons that we incorporated this time in terms of our strategy. And
this time, were you able to get enough signatures?
So actually today, we filed our petitions. The minimum requirement is 12,500 signatures. We filed 62,000 signatures to get on the ballot. And at last count, I think we probably filed more petitions, more signatures than any other candidate, including all of the establishment candidates. So this is a huge moment for us. It validates our people-powered message. It validates everything that we've been talking about Chicagoans wanting a different kind of leadership and being ready for change and being ready to cut ties with the establishment. And yeah, so we filed 62,000. That was twice what our goal was. So we really we really did a good job on that front.
Well, last time they were ripping things up, this time you were ripping things up in a different way. I love it. It's a great story of perseverance and serving the community throughout. And boy, that would be a welcome change from what Rahm Emanuel had brought Chicago. And it is rough politics over there. But as a person that is uncorrupted and not taking corporate PAC money, you've got a lot of supporters that are rooting for you. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for not giving up and continuing the fight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.